A very good morning to all the dignitaries and participants who have joined here for this AICT Training and Learning Academy's Faculty Development Program on Electric Vehicle Challenges and Opportunities in Future India, organized by the Department of Mechanical Engineering, RMK College of Engineering and Technology, Chennai. So, welcome to this Day 3 ATL FDP program. Till now, we have received so many positive responses through feedback, even in chat box too. I thank you all on behalf of the coordinator of this ATL FDP, Dr. Bibin sir. And today we have three sessions. The very first session is on the current trends in battery thermal management system. And we have also here eminent speaker, Mr. Siddesh Gosavi sir. And it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Siddesh Gosavi to all the participants here. And he is the founder and CEO of Greenpin, a deep technology-based startup incubated at IIT Hyderabad and College of Engineering, Pune. Greenpin is providing smart solutions for lithium-ion batteries in the areas of battery degradation, state estimators, range predictors, and battery thermal management system. So its core expertise is product design and development of electric vehicle subsystems, particularly the drivetrain across all the vehicle segments, specifically for two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and passenger electric cars. So he was actively involved in commissioning of scalable electric vehicle infrastructure projects and HVAC projects at IIT Bombay, IIT Madras, and College of Engineering, Pune. And his area of expertise in development of state estimators for lithium-ion batteries, battery thermal management system, battery pack design, vehicle integration, homologation, lithium-ion cell testing, and project management. It's my pleasure to welcome you in this session, sir. And now I request Mr. Siddesh Gosavi, sir, to discuss his presentation on current trends in battery thermal management system. Now the session is yours, sir.
Thank you, sir, for the introduction. We'll start with the session. So, regarding the scope of the presentation, what I've included is the overall concept of what all we do. Like when we get an requirement from an OEM, how in what direction do we proceed? What are the sorts of design calculations that we do? What are the current different types of management techniques are available in thermal management, and how we proceed generally, the process flow of what we are doing here at Greenspin that we shall be discussing. And at the end, I shall also be having some case studies done with the Chevy Bolt electric vehicle as well as Tesla car and the latest technologies that are there in this domain. So to begin with, yeah. So is the slide changing without any lag? Hello? So can you confirm that this is the slide? Okay, okay, thanks. So just to have a prior idea of what exactly our core vision here is. So like everyone knows that like with 22% CAGR and plus 22% CAGR, the electric vehicle industry will be growing in this decade. So what we think here is, as we know, for an IC engine market right now, there are around 100 and 120 companies that are auto ancillaries, that is the tier one suppliers for engine components. So what we envision is that there will be similar demand for the electric vehicles, that we should be needing an ecosystem of auto ancillaries that will be specifically catering the electric vehicle market. So when I say that, I mean that to have a tier one suppliers for battery packs, motors, power electronics, and all of those things. So keeping this in mind, we have converged on one of our product, that is the battery thermal management system. So what we do here at Greenspan is we make the BTMS system complete end to end for cabin cooling, battery cooling, motor, power electronics and all, and we deploy it into the passenger vehicles and do the performance testing for different OEMs. So that's the overall background of what our company is doing. And to begin with the scope of the presentation, what these are the aspects that we will be focusing throughout the scope here. So first we'll be discussing why the need for BTMS, what's the different types, what's the design calculations that needs to be done, what are the simulation platforms that we use for design optimization, and each component of this design optimization is associated with a cost, and how do we tackle this cost factor considering the price sensitive market, and how are the leading OEMs that are approaching in this regard, specifically for the BTMS system. So this shall be our like the objective for us right now is to clear all of this doubts as well as any material regarding this FAQs. And post presentation, we can have a Q&A session in order to discuss more. So yeah, so to begin with, why BTMS system? There are threefold objectives that why we use this thermal management system. The three main objectives are to increase the cell cycle life, dangerous situations we need to prevent, and increase the battery performance. But there is one major disadvantage of an inherent disadvantage of this BTMS system. That is that it is an auxiliary load. So that the power consumption of this BTMS unit is parasitic in nature. So what all power it will be consuming, it will be from my main battery itself. And because of this, there are three pain points right now the industry is facing: the vehicle range reduction. Because of that, there's an operational cost, and like obviously when the range is reducing, we have to do the frequent charging for the vehicles. And to just give a perspective of how critical this problem right now is, I have cited one research paper summary that says that in general, there is a 33% decrease in the driving range because of this air conditioning unit. So this air conditioning unit includes the BTMS cooling, the cabin cooling, and the overall other auxiliary cooling that the vehicle may need. But this value 33% is a huge value, because if my promised range is a 300 kilometers, then I'm compromising 100 kilometers just because of the cooling unit. So in order to navigate through these pain points, we are developing some solutions, and how to tackle these challenges, we shall be discussing it in the PPT. So speaking of the why BTMS to maximize cell life. So if we plot the aging curve of a lithium ion battery or a lithium ion cell of any chemistry, this is applicable across chemistries. What we find is between the 25 to 35 reason, the cell cycle life is the maximum that we get. And as you can see that since as of here in India, we don't have those problems, but in most of the countries in our European market, the temperature is minus 10, it's below 10 degrees Celsius. And there we can see the very drastic reduction in the cell cycle life. So like if you can see the values mentioned here, from 1250, so from 1000 to 750 in this range. So there is around 30 to 40% decrease in cell cycle life if I'm not able to maintain the temperature in the required zone. So, and what the cell cycle life decrease directly translates into is number of reduction in the years of which for example, it decreases the overall life of my vehicle, of my battery specifically. So if considering this values, if my battery pack is desired to last for 3 years, and if I'm not maintaining it between 25 to 35 degrees Celsius, my battery life shall be lasting for just 2.5 years. So that is a huge drawback if we don't use a BTMS system. So apart from the BTMS system, the cell cycle life, there is one major advantage to use the BTMS system is to ensure safety. So this is a critical problem right now, the thermal runaway issue. So there are many root causes to identify why the problem is caused, why the thermal runaway is caused, and one of the main common platform for the reason it is caused is because of the thermal internal short circuit. So say the separator layer gets punctured and the cell is internally short. One cell gets heated up, it crosses the thermal barrier, that is the thermal runaway stage 1 temperature, and then the cycle continues. And it's a upward spiral. So if there is a increase in reaction rate, heat is produced. So again, there is an exothermic reaction, and this goes on continuing till the complete battery pack is destroyed, the vehicle is destroyed, everything is burned down, and everything is combusted. this process continues. So how does BTMS able to tackle this challenge is that we develop algorithms to predict this thermal runaway prior hand. So since it's a smart vehicle, we always have a track of all the data values of voltage, temperature, as well as current, cell level voltages, SOCs, SOH, everything we are getting a track of. And what our algorithm does is we predict, okay, if this situation is happening, we are able to obtain certain behavioral change in the data. And that means the thermal runaway is in the initial stage. And so let's deploy one algorithm to provide an alert or to stop the make the circuit open or to notify it or to increase the flow rate or to increase the compressor RPM in order to offshoot those temperature peaks. So all of those things we are able to take in control with the BTMS unit and the overall BTMS components as well. So in order to summarize, what the BTMS shall do is it shall make sure that your battery temperature does not reach above 50 degrees Celsius. It shall make sure that your battery temperature does not reach below 15 degrees Celsius or 20 degrees Celsius. And in case if even if it reaches or it predicts that if it is reaching, it shall take the necessary steps to avoid any casualties. So that is the another big major reason to use the BTMS system. And for better performance. So for better performance, what I mean is right now, say for an example, an IC car that we all drive, there is no direct relation of the ambient temperature with the performance. So even if I'm driving at say 45 degrees Celsius or 15 degrees Celsius, there won't be any major performance in my like I won't experience any major change. Uh, but here inside lithium ion, what's happening is the internal heat resistance of the cell changes is a very strong function of the temperature as pointed here. So just to like we can see at 45 degrees, 55 degrees Celsius, it's 1.3, and for 30 degrees Celsius, it's around 1, we can assume it. So there is at least 30% increase in the internal resistance of the cell with respect to temperature. So if this is the case, what's happening is because of this high internal resistance at high temperature, my heat generation value inside the battery pack is too high. So the resultant temperature is also too high. So because of that, my performance drops down. So my current has to be limited. So I won't be experiencing that kind of pickup or acceleration that can I have in the normal IC vehicle if there is no BTMS system. But most of the passenger cars, like not only passengers, all segments of four-wheelers, buses, and even three-wheelers have been starting to incorporate those BTMS units in them so that all these problems can be solved and the drivability of the rider is no affected by this increasing thermal resistance. So this pyramid summarizes the 3 points that we have discussed. Like we need the BTMS to have a good cycle life, safety, the performance, and to have a and to arrest the value of internal resistance. Arrest in the sense to maintain the temperature within the required zone so that internal resistance is not drastically increased. So then there are different options that OEMs pursue. So like the Nissan Leaf example that I have cited here. So they had been using air cooling strategy for the battery cooling, which is not very good as compared to the liquid cooling strategy. So here we can see that there is some loss in the branding of the vehicle because of the very low cycle life that people got from Nissan Leaf. And another major concern for BTMS is we always think that this is during the discharging or I'm driving the vehicle, the BTMS is active. But one of the major application of the BTMS system is during the charging, especially during the fast charging. So as we know that when Tesla charges the vehicle at 150 kilowatt or 200 kilowatt, at that time the huge amount of heat is generated inside the batteries. So the BTMS system plays a very crucial part in order to extract that heat from the system during the fast charging process. also during fast charging system, the BTMS system not only has to take the heat away from the batteries, as well as it has to take the heat away from the onboard charger the vehicle has, because the power electronics heat load is drastically high when charging at high C rates. So we shall also be discussing how we channelize those values, like what all factors that we consider for power electronics cooling, as well as for the normal battery cooling, motor cooling, and all of this complete circuitry. So just to be clear, so the BTMS system is equally important while charging as well as discharging, and is in fact more important in case if we are aiming for a fast charge. So speaking of a BTMS system, we'll have individual vehicle categories and how are the different steps that we take in order to tackle the thermal problem. So starting with the two-wheeler category, because this is the most prominent market here. There are two sides of two-wheelers that we shall be observing on the Indian roads. One shall be a low-powered, low premium, like a normal two-wheeler with 1.5 kilowatt hour. The standard one that maximum speed is 25 kilometers per hour as per the ARR. And here, what the situation here is, this two-wheeler shall be having the maximum power consumption less than 2 kilowatt. If this is the case, we absolutely no need any cooling system, active or passive, if my load is just 2 kilowatt, because the heat generation itself will be low. So the temperature rise, at least it can be some 5-6 degrees Celsius, and the BMS can have a provision to stop the current if the temperature reaches above 45 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Celsius. So this is a very straightforward process. There's no complex design involved in for two-wheelers, at least for low-powered two-wheelers to be specific. No, but if we consider a premium two-wheeler that will be there, like the recent Olas, the Aethers, in that case, the maximum power consumption shall be 6 kilowatts. This is the power consumption by the vehicle, that is the two-wheeler. So if this is the case, then there are certain aspects of thermal management that we need to see. And as we can see, this is a screenshot of the Aether vehicle, and the battery pack has been used by made by aluminum die casting, because for the proper heat dissipation. Whereas the above one that you can see, this can be a normal mild steel box or any plastic box, because the power consumption is low. So here we can see how two-wheelers shall be tackling this problem based on what are the maximum power as well as what's the heat load. And depending on that, they will be taking the decisions. But in general, what we can say is that most of the two-wheeler market, it will be heavily based on an air cooling unit. Air cooling, that is the forced or the natural. So there is no liquid or any sorts of compressor refrigerant arrangement that can be incorporated here, because of the sizing requirements as well as the cost. But if we consider the four-wheeler category, so the above picture is of the e-Verito, and we know that for the maximum power consumption in e-Verito is 30 kilowatt. So again, the purpose of this slide is to give an idea that the BTMS system that we select is not like for four-wheeler we use such air-cooled, or for all are air-cooled in that regard. So one of the major factor that takes place for the decision making is what's my heat load. So the power requirement of the vehicle is crucial in deciding what's the heat load. So here I can see the e-Verito battery pack is 30 kilowatt, whereas the Tesla battery pack is 345 kilowatt. I mean the maximum power, as well as the size of the battery pack is 5 times more. So that's when the air cooling is a very inefficient one to do in such a huge battery pack with such huge heat load. So in that we have to shift for liquid cooling. So this is how, depending on what my load is, what the vehicle category is, we select what is the appropriate strategy that needs to be selected for cooling the batteries. And at the same time, for the four-wheeler categories, it's not only the battery, we have to consider the cabin cooling aspects as well as the onboard charger. I think for premium vehicles, because most of the vehicles won't have an onboard charger. but the other auxiliary cooling required for motors as well as for power electronics. So all this comprehensive view needs to be taken in order to design the BTMS unit for the four-wheeler. So through these two slides, what we can see is the first problem, the vehicle category. So here what I have mentioned is, if I had to design any thermal system right now, I should be needing certain kind of inputs. Okay, a prior idea of what exactly my application is. And depending on that, I should be starting with my design process. So here the factors that shall be considered while designing the thermal system, I have listed it down here. The vehicle category we have already discussed about. Apart from that, there is load profile, geographic locations. I have no control over these factors. The customer or the consumer the EV owner can take the vehicle and can go to any Himalayan cold weather, or they can go to any hot desert also. So I have absolutely no control over these two profiles, whether it will be a gradient drive or it will be a highway drive, whether it will be an in-city drive. So whatever I design should incorporate all these design points in the BTMS system. So that is one aspect, and as well as the cell type and cell chemistry. So mostly this factor is selected by the OEM. So for example, if Mahindra is making e-Verito or Tesla is making their Model S, what is the cell type, what kind of chemistry it has, it's the decision to be taken by them, and they are the ones who do the battery pack design. So here also, what we have as an input is we need to understand the cell chemistry, what is the behavior, say, how is the resistance changing with SOCs, how is the internal, I mean to say heat generation changing with different C rates. All of those things need to be experimented before I can arrive at a value of a BTMS system specification. So these are the values that govern the heat generation inside the cell. So LFP chemistry is considered most stable from thermal design point of view, whereas NCA chemistry is a little bit like the temperature rises too high in that case. So thermal stability is not that good as compared to the LFP chemistry. So when I say that thermal stability is not good, there are different background information. So for like, because the cathode material is different, the separator, I mean to say the electrolytes are different. So it's not a generalized statement, but most of in the industry, we consider LFP to be more stable, thermally stable. So that decision takes, so if I have to design a BTMS strategy for an LFP cell, my entire thought process will be different as compared to the NCA chemistry. Along with that, cell type, as we know, for cylindrical, prismatic, pouch cell, the different cell sizing, everything changes, the design aspects changes, and the volumetric and weight constraints. So that again, this value has to be determined by the OEM, what all the space they have available in order to install this BTMS unit. What, like, they have some constraints that the BTMS unit should not be more than 10-15 kgs. So depending on that, that is one of our input that goes into the design of condensers, evaporators, and all of those things inside the BTMS unit. And at the last, there is the cost competitiveness. So whatever the development cost, operation, and the maintenance cost, it should be competitive from cost point of view. So by operational cost, I mean the BTMS unit will be every time consuming the energy from the battery. So that shall add to your operational cost as well. And for maintenance, generally there is no maintenance as such needed, but in case there is some refrigeration recharge that needs to be done, or evaporator cleaning needs to be done, or some diagnostics, prognostic tools that needs to be evaluated, all those things is associated with some cost, and that has to be mutually agreed by the OEM as well. So regarding speaking of the cell type, so when I say the development of BTMS unit, it happens in parallel with the development of the battery pack as well. So as we can see that when cell level to module level, pack level, as I change my cell type, the structure of the BTMS system changes. So if I'm using a cylindrical cell, I have to design the evaporator, that is the cold plate, with proper bends so that maximum area of contact of the cylindrical cell is observed. If I'm using, say, prismatic cell like this, then I can have a straight flat cold plate as well. So what kind of cell that I'm using will decide the design of the evaporator. So evaporator, you can call it as a cold plate in most of the instances. So here what the situation is, for cylindrical cell, the evaporator design is very intricate. It's a little complex as we can see in the Tesla packs. But if there is prismatic or pouch cell, there is a flat bed structure with the internal routing of the refrigerant that's like an easy way to design and manufacture. So this is some of the so here the I was insisting on the cell type has an influence on how the BTMS needs to be designed. So uh, another aspect here is the battery pack specifications. So if I had to arrive at a value or I have to freeze the value of a BTMS system, so to do that, I should be knowing the complete drive profile, the current profile, the peak loads, the gradient loads, the highway loads, the entire drive profile of the vehicle. So based on this drive profile, what I'll do is I'll get the current values, the heat generation values, and the BTMS system shall take in consideration that all these values, the heat generation because of these values is taken care, like it is within the design limits. So here we can see the Chevy Volt battery pack. It's a 163 Ah battery pack. So based on the drive profile, we know that, okay, the maximum discharge rate for this vehicle is set 2C. So based on that, I know that, okay, it's not more than 326 amperes. So the maximum current that shall be drawn in this battery pack is restricted at 326 ampere. So this shall be one of the input in designing the heat load, in calculating the heat load and designing the components like condenser, evaporator, as well as the expansion valve. So the battery pack specification, what they give us an idea is what shall be my maximum current, and based on that, heat load needs to be calculated. So the if I had to say that if I had to start the design process, the foremost thing that I need to design the BTMS is I should be knowing the value of heat generation inside the battery pack. But the problem now is the heat generation on battery pack is not as dependent on single value like current or temperature. It's depending on the some 8-9 parameter values that are dynamic in nature. The C rate is changing. C rate, I mean by C rate, you can consider it as a non-dimensional current value. So the current is changing every second, temperature, everything is changing. My SOC is changing. IR obviously changes. Even if my battery pack is say 6 months older, even if all the other parameters are same, the value will be changing because there is a degradation aspect that needs to be factored in. Whether I'm charging, discharging, again, the value is changing. So now the issue becomes critical because this 8 to 9 parameters that are dynamic in nature shall be responsible for heat generation. So what we do is we identify some strong functions like, okay, we ignore the number of cell cycles used. We consider some 3 to 4 strong functions of which the heat generation value depends on. And then we dissect it with different SOCs and we arrive at the heat generation needed, not needed, that is generated inside the battery pack. So here is the design process that's followed. So as I said earlier, one of the foremost factor that I need to know is what's the heat generation value. So in order to arrive at this value, there are two aspects, like the two methods. One is the simulation as well as the experimental based method. So what we do is we proceed both the methods in parallel. once we get a value, the value can be like, okay, my rated heat load is 1000 watts, my peak load is 3000 watts. So once I get these values, then the subsystem component design like condenser, the evaporator, the system integration, the ducting, everything, the PHEV heat exchanger, all this component design starts when I am able to get the value of thermal load. So again, in the next slides, we'll discuss on how the thermal load is calculated. And so once I know the value of thermal load, what we do is we start the fabrication, prototyping of these heat exchangers, the system integration, and do the testing. And after the testing and optimization is done, there is always a feedback loop that goes into the simulation process. So in case some of our design points are not covered in this domain, so what we do is we resize the components. The resizing can be as simple as we need to upsize the fan. Say for example, my earlier fan was 300 CFM. I am not getting the expected results. I have to increase the fan CFM or the fan speed, or I have to connect another fan in parallel or series, or I have to increase the condenser area. So all this iteration process continues till the in the pilot running as well, so that once all the results are as per the expectation and within the design limits, we deploy it into the for mass production of this components. So these design process, a crucial aspect of this design process is the strategies as well. So like we shall discuss it in detail in the subsequent slides, but strategies, I mean, like what should be my, how should be my compressor RPM be changing? What should be my flow rates? Should it be dynamic? On what factors to be considered in order to change those flow rate? So all of those things also needs to be factored in apart from designing the mechanical parts like heat exchangers and all shown here. So speaking about the heat generation value, there are two aspects to it. One is the Joule heating and one is the entropic heating. So in this slide, in the subsequent 3-4 slides, what shall be discussing is, like I have mentioned here, the thermal load of the battery is based on two things, simulation and experimental. So in this 3-4 slides, we'll decide how the experimental steps that we take in order to arrive at the heat generation value. So the Joule heating is very simple. It's basically the current that the battery pack is charging or discharging and the internal resistance. It's basically an I square loss, I square R loss. Because of all this, as we can see from anode to cathode, the ion has to move through all these barriers, and it's basically because of all of this, there is a friction, ionic resistance, correctly is the correct terminology. And because of that, there is this heat generation. And then there is an entropic heat. That is a very rigorous process to calculate the entropic heat. But just to make an analogy for say for example, copper, if I'm passing a current of 100 amperes through a copper tube or a copper wire, its I square R loss is pretty much simple. We know the resistance as a constant value. But for the lithium ion cell, that's not the case, because the resistance will be changing again with respect to my SOC, with respect to my state of health, whether it's my battery is very new or whether it's old. So again, the R needs to be determined. By R, I mean the internal resistance of the cell. So in order to determine the internal resistance of the cell, there are two approaches. One is DCIR method, one is ACIR method. So here the circuit that you can see, that there is a resistance and a parallel RC branch that is connected. What does this represent is, it represents the lithium ion cell in a circuit diagram with one RC pair. So the objective for us right now is to calculate RS plus RP value, because we need the internal resistance for our heat calculations. And also these values are not constant values. They shall be changing with SOC. So I have to, what I have to do is I have to charge the cell fully, say at 100% SOC, I have to measure the resistance value. Then I have to discharge it, make it reach equilibrium at 95% SOC. it will, I have to measure again those values. So by step, I have to do, and at the end, what I shall be getting is the internal resistance variation with respect to SOC. And by SOC, I mean the normal SOC that we see, like that gives us the idea of how much battery is remaining. So if it's 100% charge, or if it's 98% or 85%, the one that we get on the mobile itself, the state of charge of the battery. So yeah, so here the point that I was saying was for discharging, as I mentioned. So this one represents that my cell was completely charged. That's the 100% charge, and this is 0% charge. So as I'm discharging, we can see that the internal resistance of the cell goes on increasing. At lower values below 10%, the difference is drastically high. So we can see that if it's around 20 and this is 10, so it's 200 times more as compared to one at higher SOCs. Again, if my cell is new or aged, the values are very different. And this graph is discharging graph, but for charging, what we observe is we observe a bucket type of curve. So the for charging, the internal resistance is high during high SOCs as well. And between 0.2 to 0.8, the internal resistance is low. So how does this play a role is that once the internal resistance is high, that means my heat generation will be high. So if I can see here that my resistance, internal resistance is changing 2 times, that means my heat generation shall also be changing 2 times because it's a linear function. And this 2-time increase in the internal resistance can lead to severe temperature rises. So all this study becomes crucial that we need to dissect the cell with different, dissect in the sense we have to do loads of experiments on it for thermal testing and to arrive at these values. And speaking what up till this stage, what we have done is we have arrived at the IR value, the R value, and we have covered this part, the Joule heating part. And now the entropic heating. So for I have listed down the procedure how to do the entropic heat calculations, heat generation. It's a very, very lengthy process. But at the end of all this process, what we get is on y-axis, we get the entropic heat generation value, which is changing with respect to SOCs. So once we get this value, what we have to do is we have to add those values. We have to see another lookup table, as you can see here. So based on the chemistry, again it changes. So this figure is for an LFP, the LMO chemistry. So here, the two graphs that you can see, these are the lookup tables for this value, the entropic heat that we have calculated. So once we get the Joule heat lookup tables, once we get the entropic heat lookup tables as a function of SOC, we need to add those, and then we arrive at finally the heat generation value. So the total heat is in the black color, and that is a summation of the Joule heat as well as the reaction heat. By reaction heat, it is the same as the entropic heat that I was referring earlier. So again, once we calculate the total heat generation value, this is per cell. Like, so you can see that it changes from 2.5 to 0.5 watts. That's like 5 times is the variation. So so this is all the, like we have to get an idea of what's the maximum, what's the rated, what's the minimum. And that too, what all these experiments that we have done, that is just at 25 degrees Celsius and 1 C rate. You have to repeat again all of this procedure at say 45 degrees Celsius and at 1 C rate, and then at 2 C rate. So there is a rigorous amount of experimentation that needs to be done in order to get converge to the value of heat generation, because as discussed, heat generation depends on many, many factors. So another simpler method to determine heat is through calorimetry. So this is a bomb calorimeter concept that's it's generally used. So here I have to discharge the cell at different C rates at different dry profiles, and the heat temperature, the heat generation is directly logged in. So this is a very simple way and a straightforward way if I have to determine it on a fast track basis. So speaking of the thermal load of the battery pack, what we have shown here is right now what we have discussed up till now was the internal heat generation of the cell. So that is one aspect. But another aspect is the convective heat influx and conduction heat influx that's happening inside the battery pack from the ambient. So if my operation is happening in a desert region or a very hot climate region, then the conduction convection heat flux value will be a huge, like it will be between 20 to 25%. So I have to upsize my thermal load of the battery pack accordingly. If it is low, if it is minus 5 degrees Celsius, minus 10 degrees Celsius, then it comes into the category of outflux, and then that also shall impact my overall thermal load of the battery. And I have the importance of each of the parameter I have showcased by the font size itself. So one of the most critical one is the heat generation by the cell. Then the convection and the conduction heat fluxes needs to be calculated from the ambient. And apart from that, there is no major heat load inside the battery pack. One is the heat generation by battery BMS system, because there are MOSFET switches, power electronics in the BMS. They shall be contributing it to certain extent, as well as the bus bars. So once we have a cumulative addition of all these parameters, what we arrive finally is that we have arrived at the thermal load of the battery pack. So this thermal load of the battery pack shall include all the design points, the design limits, gradient climb, gradient load, harsh ambient conditions. Everything needs to be included within this thermal load. So here is the pictorial representation again of the same thing, the conductive, convective, heat generation. So if I have to do the control volume study, so this is my control volume, and this will be my heat influxes, and this should be my target. Okay, the heat removed by the thermal management system. One of the important thing here is the conductive heat influx depends on how your OEM is placing this battery pack in the vehicle. If he is placing it on the footbed, and if it is not insulated, because the road temperature is 60-70 degrees Celsius, there will be a high amount of radiative heat transfer there as well. That is not included in this. So this is by considering that the OEM has already taken in perspective all the other insulation aspects, uh, this calculation is done. So now that we have arrived at the thermal load of the battery pack, let's say for example that okay, the value for the, we got to know that the rated load of the battery pack is 3000 watts. The maximum load of the maximum heat load of the battery pack is 7000 watts. So now we have these two values with us, as well as we have the drive profile, like while driving, how will be the variation of this heat load. So once we have this rated and maximum thermal load with us, now the objective is to select the thermal strategy. So moving on to the thermal strategies, I mentioned all the strategies in the sense the types of systems available. Strategy is altogether different aspect. So if you, it's a cabin cooling system. So for a, if as I told, like if my rated heat load is 3000 watt, the design for the evaporator, condenser, everything will be very bulky systems for that much amount of load. So cabin cooling should not be preferred in this kind of high heat loads. Okay, by cabin cooling, what I mean is right now most of the IC engines, not most, all of the IC engines that have the ACs, they have a VCRS system, vapor compression refrigeration cycle. So that's the same unit as we can see. So what they do is we when we cool the cabin, they pass the same cool cabin air inside or around the battery pack in order to take the heat away from the battery pack. So that is cooling the battery pack with the cabin air itself. It's very inefficient. But if your load is, if your heat load, so whenever I say load, that means I'm meaning the heat load. So if the heat load is very less, then this can be a suitable option to explore. But normally we don't use these things. Even if we have to use, we design a specific air cooling unit for a battery, like the one that has been used in Nissan Leaf. So Still, cabin air cooling is one option. Then the other option is the radiator liquid cooling system. So this is how our IC engine gets cooled through the radiator pump arrangement. Here what we are doing is we are cooling the battery with the same arrangement. Obviously the coolant will be different, but again this type of method is not used for battery cooling because this is mostly preferred for if I have to cool my motor or my power electronic systems. Because for battery cooling, my coolant temperature itself has to be around 10 degrees Celsius to 15 degrees Celsius, and this is not possible with pure sensible cooling as shown here. So radiator cooling is still one option in the thermal management system. Now these two options are heavily used in, especially in all the four-wheelers as well as in the electric bus segment. So direct and the secondary cooling. So as we know the VCRS cycle, the vapor compression refrigeration cycle, this is the same unit. What they do is they have multiple evaporators. Yeah, so multiple evaporators, I mean the evaporator that you can see here, that is for cabin cooling, and they pass the refrigerant in another line for battery cooling through the cold plate. So here there is no water ethylene glycol. It's just the same refrigerant. Mostly it's R134A. It's passed into the evaporator and the same line is passed into the cold plate. That refrigerant takes heat and then it's rejected into the condenser. This is a direct refrigerant. A BMW i3 uses this kind of direct refrigeration two-phase cooling. Another the disadvantage in this is it's not that much flexible considering the flow rates, considering if I have to heat the battery pack, then I have to operate the VCRS system in a reverse manner, and that is a little, not little, it's a very complex thing to do as compared to normal resistive heating for secondary cooling. So that's why this application is preferred mostly in high premium cars. But for the secondary loop cooling, one of the major advantages, it's the same, it's the direct refrigerant cooling itself up to the chiller. So what we can see is that instead of the refrigerant cooling the cold plate and the battery, the refrigerant cools the chiller. Chiller in the sense the water ethylene glycol coolant, and then it passes into the compressor. And now it is the task of this water ethylene glycol coolant to cool my battery. So what the refrigerant here is the primary coolant, whereas the water ethylene glycol is the secondary coolant. So one of the advantage in this method is that it's very flexible, as we can see, because in case if I don't want this evaporator to be functioning, or in case I don't want my chiller to be active, I just have to shut down this one, whereas I can continue using the evaporator as well. Like also the same water ethylene glycol I can pass into my motor cooling unit as well, power cooling unit as well. And if I have to heat the battery pack, that will be the case in most of the cold countries. What I have to do is I don't have to turn the compressor on. I just have to heat the chilling mixture. And then the chilling mixture will be heating the battery. And the by chiller, I mean it's a heat exchanger in which heat exchange takes place between the refrigerant and the water ethylene glycol. So this one is a pretty flexible method. We shall study the different topologies that are used in the OEMs as well. Now we can see the phase change material and thermoelectric. So these methods actually are cannot be used for four-wheelers at least, but for small specific applications for two-wheelers, or if I have to cool any power electronics MOSFET, or a small limited localized cooling needs to be done, then this is a good option to explore the phase change material and the thermoelectric, because the COP for this system is like for phase change there is no COP, but for thermoelectric element the COP is less than 0.8. So we don't want such inefficient systems to cool the battery packs. So that's why they are not used in the battery cooling, and even if they are used, then it's in the research phase right now. But for phase change cooling, one major challenge that we cannot use it, because if I had to take all the heat that we have arrived, like say the 3000 watt heat, if I have to take away from a phase change material, the amount of phase change material that I would be needing would be way higher. Like it will be around, we can say 40-50 kg of these material shall be needed in order to take the heat away. But a better option is to have the indirect cooling, liquid cooling, because the system weight, size, everything will be low. But if the application is for a two-wheeler, say between 100 watts is the heat load, then phase change is a very good option to explore. So the one point that we have discussed here is the thermal load of the battery pack, the 3000 and the 7000 peak value that we are considering right now. But apart from the battery pack heat load, there are many other thermal loads for the electric vehicle as well. And most of the cooling system is a centralized system. So the compressor that I can use, that is for my battery cooling also, for cabin cooling also, and for other heat loads also. So if that is the case, apart from the battery thermal load, I need to be knowing all the other loads as well. So that all the other loads that are there in the electric vehicle, I have listed it here. So you can see here the thermal load. The cabin cooling is obvious for air conditioning, but for power electronics, DC converters, motors, and onboard charger. Onboard charger is a critical because that heat load is also too high. And except for the first two, all other four, always the requirement is always for cooling. It's never a situation where I need to heat the motor. In case if the temperature is say, below -10, then that's the case. But majorly all these four bottom listed here, the requirement is mostly cooling, whereas for the above, it's heating as well as for cooling. So there is no isolated thermal management system just to make for the battery pack. We have to consider the cabin, the entire package of the electric vehicle to do the sizing, design, and deployment. So here we can see the same Chevy Bolt battery pack. What we can come to know, like generally the specifications they have mentioned here, what's the maximum torque, what's the maximum power the car can deliver. So based on that, so we can see here it's the 160 kilowatt peak the battery power can deliver. So based on that, we get an estimate of what's the maximum current value. So it's 150 amps. So let's have all these design calculations take consider the heat generation at 150 amps as well. So all these aspects, like the heat generation value, as we had discussed earlier, comes into play. Yeah, so this is the most important slide here. This is the Chevy Bolt, the complete topology of a EV unit. So as we had discussed the different types of thermal management systems, direct, indirect. So actually what happens is there is a combined hybrid of all these cooling systems. So let's first consider the during hot surrounding temperature, what is the case? So here what we can see is that there is a direct refrigerant system for cabin cooling. There is a chiller, that's the secondary cooling also for cooling the batteries. Radiator circuit is entirely different and independent. Here there is a radiator based cooling to cool all these four parts, and there is a heating module also. But now since it's a hot surrounding temperature, our objective is twofold. We have to reduce the temperature of, we have to take heat away from this auxiliary units like motor controller, power electronics and all. We have to cool the cabin for comfort of the passengers, as well as we have to cool the battery pack as well. So in this thing, how the situation will turn out is that my compressor shall be functioning in this case, and the air shall be passed on through the evaporator. It shall be cooled, and the cooled air will be passed into the cabin. And another refrigerant line will pass into the chiller. It shall cool the water ethylene glycol mixture, and once it's cooled, the mixture shall be passed into the cold plate. The cold plate will take the heat away from the batteries. Now, there are too many paths that are there in this circuit. So when I say the control strategy, by that, I mean there are these operating parameters. So at what temperature should I allow it to cool? So I can't pass the water ethylene glycol mixture at say minus 5 degrees Celsius. I have to pass it at 5 degrees Celsius. So all those limiters needs to be set in the BTMS unit, the controller, I mean, the thermal controller. I have to monitor the flow rate of the pump. So if the battery pack is not getting cooled, in spite of doing all of those things, then we have to check where we have to increase the flow rate. We have to increase the compressor RPM in case if the my chiller system is not getting cooled. So there are many of the backward, if we move backward, there are 4 or 5 parameters that we need to identify. If certain objective is not getting fulfilled, we have to tune those parameters and we have to re-experiment again up till the point that the result is obtained. So the control strategy involves the power optimization as well. So as we can see here, this is the power consuming part, the compressor, as well as there will be fans here. Like in the schematic, fans are not mentioned, but there will be like it's obvious. Like if there is an evaporator, there has to be a fan here to push the air cooled air inside the cabin. Okay, it's shown by the F symbol. The condenser also shall be having the fan to heat reject out of the system. So the power consuming devices needs to be optimized for minimum power consumption. So that also needs to be taken control by the BTMS controller through different control strategies. So moving on to the next unit, the heater unit. Heater unit is very simple. There is this same chiller. There will be a heating coil inside the chiller and there will be the heating module. So what it shall do is it shall the chiller there will be a heat exchanger here that shall be at a higher temperature and air will pass on to it, get heated and move into the cabin like I have shown it here. So if my condition is during cold surrounding, then I have to turn this compressor off. Only this unit is functioning. So if this unit is functioning, my heater module is on, my hot air is let into the heat exchanger and through that into the cabin. Apart from the cabin heating, what I have to do now is I have to heat the battery as well. So the heater module has to heat the chiller. Once it heats the chiller, that means there is a water ethylene glycol temperature shall be increased. Increased in the sense it shall be maintained at 35-40 degrees Celsius. And once it reaches that value, it shall be passed into the cold plate and it will heat up the battery. So this will be the fluid flow in for heating the battery pack. And speaking of the radiator, this is always the same, whether I have to heat or whether I have to cool, because radiator based cooling, mostly it's for cooling application only. There are very few instances when there is a requirement that I have to heat the power electronics part. Mostly in very, very cold climatic conditions, this should be the case. And here we can see that this arrangement that is shown is just a representative diagram. Then we can club all these things together. So as you can see the fan that is shown here, that fan takes the heat away from, it's a single fan that takes heat away from condenser as well as from this radiator itself. And you can consider this as a top view of the vehicle. So through the fan, we can, it's there at the front, it's a suction fan. We are cooling the complete unit. That this load and this, so I mean to say that this fan selection should take place by considering the condenser load as well, the radiator load. So this is the complete. So again, this schematic that I'm showing, that is specifically for a Chevy Bolt use case. So again, different OEMs will have different topologies. Some may say that, okay, I don't want a radiator system for the motor controller unit. I want to have this same water ethylene glycol passed into this power electronics and make it do the cooling for these systems as well. Mostly Tesla uses this kind of direct water ethylene glycol mixture for motor cooling. So again, these things can be taken in parallel. So one need not be in series. There can be a 3 ports here, one going into the motor control unit as well. So depending on the complete topology, every OEM will have their different schematics. So as well as the different control strategy in order to control all of these things. Apart from that, so this is you can say a diagram level or a schematic level representation. What actually happens are plenty of inefficiencies are added during the integration as well. So one major inefficiencies is when plate and battery, as you can see here, if there is any loss of contact, or if there is no improper contact, or if there are any air pores between the cell and my cold plate, then even though if your this complete schematic is spot on correct, sizing is correct, everything is correct, you won't be observe the desired result. That is because the practically during the assembly process, the fitment is not right. So apart from the schematic prospects as well, we have to consider the mechanical integration, how well it is clamped. Is it there any air gaps, and if so, how to tackle those air gaps? All those things needs to be considered while implementing it on ground. Yeah, so the mechanical integration aspect I'm talking here. So here we can see that these are the modules, these are the batteries. So, and the bottom one is the cold plate. So yeah, so this is the cell. Now again, if I have to take the heat from this cell, I have to make a cell holder as well. So you can see the black color one embedded with this aluminum plate, that is a cell holder. So the yellow color represents the cell. So what's actually happening here is the cell is the cold, this C color thing, that's the cell holder, the green color thing. So heat is getting transferred from the cell to the cell holder aluminum plate, and that aluminum plate is in contact with the cold plate. And the bottom one that you can see is the insulation pad. So again, one of the task here is our objective is to cool the cells in the sense we have to maintain the temperature of the cell. We don't want to have our unit taking heat from chassis. I don't want to cool the chassis parts. So the complete BTMS system needs to be thermally isolated with the chassis frame. This can be done with these insulation pads and the mounting structures. So here again, if so as per my earlier slides, if my cell changes, if it's a prismatic cell, then my holder changes. If it's a cylindrical cell, then again this cell holder changes. The arrangement, the integration of the cold plate changes. So here you can see the cold plate is the evaporator. So evaporator design is very specific to what kind of cell I'm using, what type of cell I'm using, cylindrical, prismatic or pouch. So yeah, you can see here. So the black color thing is the chassis, or not the chassis, it's the battery casing platform that shall be mounted on the chassis flat bed. So now the cool, and these are the insulation pads, and this is the cold plate, the white color one. So what happens is if you are not using the insulation pad, then this battery casing shall be one of the component taking the refrigeration take heat from, which should not be my objective. So I have to first insulate it. Once after insulation, I have to put the cold plates on it. I have to mount those cold plates properly. After mounting those cold plates, there is this thermal pad. So like I mentioned here in the schematic, there is absolutely perfect contact between the battery and the cold plate. But actually there shall be an air pores for sure, irrespective of your manufacturing or assembly process. So for that, we need to have a thermal interface material that is like a clay type of material, thermal pad, or it's a sticky glue. What it does, it fills all the pores that is there between air pores that is there between the cold plate and my target medium, that is the cell, so that the contact is there. Once the contact is there, then the heat flow shall be happening very smoothly, and I shall be getting the required result. And this is very important because say for example, if I'm not taking all these precautions during the assembly process, and what will happen is once it will be deployed, and or when you will be bench testing the system, you will not observe your desired results. So at that point you will be confused because confused in the sense I wouldn't be knowing what exactly is at fault. Is it my control strategy is at fault, or is it my condenser is under design? But the issue would have been your contact is not proper. And once the battery modules are kept on the uh, uh, cold plate, there is no way you can check this because it's not you cannot ensure there is no test as such to determine how much air gap is there. So such open points will lead to major problems as we go in the product development stage. So the apart from the component design, system integration, the control strategies, the mechanical integration of those units into the vehicle is foremost important. Uh, yes. So if I had to consider it as a sandwich layer, how it will be is there will be cell. Below the cell, there will be the thermal pad. Thermal pad will be below it. There will be the cold plate, and below the cold plate, there will be insulation, and below the insulation, there will be the battery casing. This shall be the pathway for the complete process. And this pathway should have as minimum resistance as possible. So speaking of the prismatic cells that is shown here, one of the major disadvantage here is the contact area. So as you can see that the cell is pretty big, but the effective contact area that is happening between my cell and the cold plate is only this much. That is the width of the cell. So this is because there is no other alternative if I had to do. So yeah, one more thing. So the Chevy Bolt design that I am showing is the base model one. So now the latest one does not have this kind of arrangement. What it has is, as we can see, this is the largest surface of the cell. So ideally, if I had to take heat away from the cell, it's very appropriate to cool this surface directly instead of having this arrangement. So in the latest model, the cold plates, what they have done is they have not used a singular cold plate as shown here. These are just a single cold plate arrangement. They have made a cold plate for every cell, and that cold plate is there on here, attached here on every cell. So what's happening is maximum heat area they are getting, the resistance issues is solved, and the cooling effectiveness is way higher. So, but the design is complex as compared to the one that is shown here. So likewise, every OEM keeps on like the same logic holds true for prismatic and cylindrical cells as well. So for cylindrical cells, there's the Tesla that's using. So we shall discuss in detail how they are navigating through this problem. So as you can see, this is the cold plate that is used for prismatic or for pouch cell. For Tesla, the arrangement for cold plate is like this. So obviously, to manufacturing aspect, this is a little bit tougher as compared to the straightforward process that we have seen above. Because this contours, the angle needs to be maintained during the manufacturing of the evaporator as well as during the integration of the cells and all. So it's a little bit intricate design as compared to the earlier one. So here we can see from the top view that all the cells, the cylindrical cells are in contact with this area. The angle of contact is 30 degrees, 25 to 30 degrees. And through this contact and within this cold plate, the refrigerant line is passing. Sorry, not the refrigerant, the water ethylene glycol line is passing. So that's how the heat is taking away from the cells. And there are actually 7,000 to 8,000 cells as shown here. So one of the disadvantage is that there will be temperature gradients observed because the one that shall be there very near to the cold plate shall be most favored one, while the one that is away shall be least favored one. So that is a technical by that I mean that is a surface level problem. So the current design that they have, the flow rates as well as the channeling is done so that the temperature non-uniformity is as minimum as possible. So here we can see like if it's a single channel pathway, if my fluid is coming here and it's going like a snake, my temperature temperature non-uniformity will be higher. So one objective here is you can have parallel pathway. So this can be, yeah, so it's shown here. So this can, instead of having this as the only inlet, we can have 3, 4 multiple inlets, 3, 4 multiple outlets, so that temperature non-uniformity is as minimum as possible. So there are, speaking of non-uniformity, there are two other non-uniformities. There are two non-uniformities. One is inter-cell temperature gradient and another is intra-cell temperature gradient. So if we can see this part, the cell from the top view, what we can observe is this is the cooling contact of the cell. So within this zone, my gradient of the cell will be way lower as compared to this zone. So the ideal value for it is has to be within 1 degree Celsius. So if say for example, if I have a cylindrical cell like this, my temperature variation across all this cross section, longitudinal, radial, everything should be within 1 degree Celsius. So that is the intra-cell temperature gradient, and intercell, that like we discussed, that depends on how the structure is there. So that again, by parallel branching of the cooling pipes, the temperature gradient needs to be minimized. Along with parallel branching, there is so regarding the prismatic cell that we were discussing, as you can see, the temperature gradient for prismatic cells will be higher, especially in this design, because what's happening is the cell actually is very big. It's the size of your notebook, and only this area is the heat rejection path. So again, this area shall be having a higher temperature gradient as compared to this area. So intra-cell temperature gradient shall be more as compared to one in the cylindrical cell. So if I have to solve this issue, then what I have to do is I have to make the BTMS system symmetric. So if there is a cold plate arrangement here, I have to have the same cold plate arrangement in the above as well, so that the cooling is symmetric. The temperature gradient within the cell is not that much. So all these aspects like are obviously considered by all these OEMs, and depending on that, they have finalized and deployed all of their vehicles. So yes. So apart from the mechanical arrangement that we were discussing, uh, like the contact, we were discussing about how to ensure the contact between my target body and the target medium that is taking away the heat. So the contact needs to be ensured by the mechanical structure and clamping arrangement as well. So if you can see the battery pack, so once all these modules are done here, there are all these mounting points that will pressurize, that will clamp these battery pack modules onto the thermal plate, so that it's always in the pressure, so that the very not only the contact is maintained, but the contact maintained is under pressure, so that the heat rejection shall be very effective. And inside the cold plates, I think in this photo it's not showing, there are path lines of refrigerant. So inside this cold plate itself, you will find the refrigerant flow lines. It can be a snake, it can be a parallel architecture. So again, the design of how this refrigerant flow line should be, so that the temperature non-uniformity across the cold plate also has to be minimum. So like we have discussed that the temperature gradient in cell, like intracell and intercell, that is one aspect. But if there is a temperature gradient within my cold plate itself, then that becomes a problem at the source itself. So say for example, if my temperature here is 15 degrees Celsius, and at the corners or at the surrounding region, it is 20 to 23 degrees Celsius. So if there is a problem at the source cold plate itself, then this problem shall be again reflected in my temperature cell temperature gradients. So if I have to design the evaporator, apart the refrigerant line pathways shall needs to be designed such that the temperature non-uniformity inside the cold plate, irrespective of whether battery is mounted or not, needs to be uniform. And that's why most of the cold plate are manufactured using roll bond, like the material is aluminum. So the temperature gradient is minimum in that case. So yeah. So here is the industry outlook right now, who all the players using what all the technologies. So as we had discussed the liquid cooling. So liquid cooling is used in Tesla, BMW, Chevy, Volt, the above one that we have discussed. So that is indirect cooling because in Tesla, what I'm doing is I'm taking the refrigerant and taking the refrigerant to cool the water ethylene glycol, and I'm taking the water ethylene glycol to take the heat away from the battery. That is an indirect type of cooling. In BMW i3, it's a direct refrigerant is passed into the battery pack to cool the battery pack. Similarly, in Chevy Bolt as well. So the white cold plate that you were seeing here, these are refrigerant, no, sorry, these are the coolant line as well. So again, it's an indirect cooling here. For air cooling, it's a very straightforward process because what happens in air cooling is that we don't have an evaporator like a cold plate. There is a evaporator. By evaporator, I mean there will be a microchannel heat exchanger that we have in our air conditioners, and that shall pass the air into the battery pack. So what happens is in that aspect, what we have to consider is that the airflow needs to be uniform. There should not be any hotspots inside the battery pack. There should like the all the cells. So just for an example, if I have to make a air cooling unit for this system, then the air inlet. So I had to consider inlet ports for the air along the length so that there is no such zone in which there are temperature gradients in the air. As well as I had to have a flow rate, very high flow rate of air to have the high heat transfer coefficient values. So generally, there is no, by any chance, we cannot have an air cooling unit for such big battery pack, because if I have to do that, then my fan sizing, my compressor sizing, everything will be so bulky that it will be beyond the design constraints. So air cooling, as we had discussed earlier, it's preferred for Nissan Leaf as well as for Mahindra Iverito. In case your load is not that high, heat load as well as your actual vehicle load while driving. So, and the last aspect for this presentation, like we'll be concluding it in 5 minutes, is the immersion cooling. So that is one of the most, yeah. So in that, what exactly is happening right now is for immersion cooling. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah. So right now, what we have discussed is refrigerant, water, ethylene glycol, and all sorts of arrangement, direct, indirect, air, and all. What if we can have the water, ethylene glycol, or any coolant of that sort directly in contact with the battery? So imagine if you're immersing this complete Tesla battery pack into a liquid, and then the liquid is taking heat because it's a liquid, so all cells will be equally surrounded, all flow rate should be will be obviously maintained, and like a radiator based cooling. So I'll just go back to this slide. Yeah, so somewhat of this type. So just imagine if this battery, this is not a cold plate, this is a liquid, and the battery pack is kept inside this liquid, takes the heat, it radiates outside, and then it's pumped back. So if we have that kind of system, that's the best one ever possible, because in that thing we get away with all these heavy parts, the contact problems, the what I mean to say, the cold plates, everything shall be bypassed. But in order to do those systems, what is the major problem is that I'm highlighting it in the next slide is these are the major challenge, dielectric breakdown. Because what's happening is all these passenger vehicles like Teslas as well as electric buses, they shall be rated above 400 volts, most of it 800 volts as well. So when the volt, because the liquid, so it's obvious that we cannot have any aqueous based coolants like water, ethylene glycol in that aspect. So another immersion liquid needs to be engineered. So these are some OEMs that are developing this immersion cooling. So basically, immersion cooling is not a new concept where they obviously use it for data centers right now for cooling electronics. So very, very efficient way. But the issue here is for electric vehicles, the voltage range is more than 400 volts. So if there is a liquid that is uh, so if a 400 volt battery pack if is immersed into that liquid, and if there is a dielectric breakdown or electrolysis of the liquid, obviously there will be the hydrogen generation, and there will be a huge hazardous problem in that case. So that is one of the aspect that's happening in industry right now to engineer this kind of immersion liquids for with high dielectrics. And another challenge is that the in mechanical design will be a little intricate in that case, because I just can't have this done like the battery pack immersed in a liquid and like clamp it or bolt it. I have to design individual cell holders that shall, because in order and in that cell holders we have to pour the liquid in, and that liquid shall be taking the heat. So from the design aspect, it shall be a little bit intricate. So right now, very few players are using this because of the cost aspects as well as because of the availability and the complex mechanical design. But it's a very good option to explore. So, speaking of the benefits, as we can see, drastic reduction in power consumption because it's a direct contact. My target liquid is in, actually my target body is directly immersed in that cooling medium. So that's the best way. Nothing can get more better than this. And temperature uniformity obviously will be maintained across the cells. And yeah, here is one of the most benefit is the thermal runaway prevention. So what we can have is this liquid, if it is has like a high ignition point, and if it has a very high flash point as well, high boiling points. So we can consider this liquid as an arresting of the thermal runaway. So even if my cell temperature, say there are 6,000 cells in this Tesla battery pack. Say if one cell is faulty, it not catches fire, but it runs away into thermal runaway. It's heating very drastically. So what this liquid can do is it can act as a fire retardant, so that only one cell is damaged, the proper alert is set, and then the proper prognostics is applied. So speaking of the immersion liquid desired qualities, this is the qualities that we said. It should have high specific heat, high thermal conductivity, obviously, low viscosity because I want my power consumption to be very, very less. And the most important amongst all is I want it to have a high dielectric as well, because actually it does not only depends on the voltage, so 800 volts and all. Even if there is any sharp edges, the electric field value there can be concentrated enough to have a breakdown at that particular localized zone. So the dielectric has to be way higher uh, for it to be used in high voltage applications. So this is the final concluding slide. Here so what all we have discussed up till now, we have to have some quantitative values in order to ascertain, okay, my battery life has been increased, say by 2 years, by 1 year, or by 1,000 cycles. So this needs to be quantified, and that quantifiable number has to be very justified. Also I have to evaluate has my performance characteristics improved. Uh, Say if I'm not using any of these strategies or unit, how different will be my performance on ground, my acceleration, my drivability, everything needs to be evaluated. There's no exactly quantifiable number that we can associate it with performance characteristics because it depends on the driver to driver. But for battery life, there is a quantifiable number. And based on all of this, from an overall perspective, from an OEM's perspective, we have to see whether there is a competitive advantage has been enhanced or not. So we don't want cars to be deployed by an OEM and say for example, like Nissan Leaf, like and face some challenges in a low cycle life or poor performance or some thermal runaway instances and all, because some selected instances like this may give to very bad reputation to the OEM. So based on all of this, the OEM needs to evaluate how much resource it needs to be allocated to this BTMS development, and how to have a feedback loop throughout the vehicle life to check whether everything is working fine for the 15-year life or 20-year life of the vehicle that is desired. So yeah, I think I have done with the presentation. So we can have a Q&A sessions for any discussions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the session, sir. And the participants have posted in a few queries in the chat box. The first question from Divyesh Obed. While carrying out the simulation using CFD for battery pack, can we do simulation at some constant time, or as a battery will have the different heat generation during the acceleration and deceleration? So how to model it for thermal simulation using the CFD, sir?
Okay. So yeah, the first step is to do it at constant time. Constant time, by I mean by constant C rate. So let's say your maximum thing is 2C. So first we have to do simulations for 2C. Once that is done, you get some values as a reference, then you should continue with the drive profile, like variable C rates, variable current, and all of those things. So both needs to be done actually.
Okay, sir. And one more question, and can you please give some typical example of simulation of battery, sir?
Yeah. So for simulation of battery, like, can you repeat the question?
The question from Department of Electric. Okay, sir. And the typical example of simulation of battery as an introductory work for students.
Okay. So I think what asking is like what kind of simulations, case setups needs to be done in order for CFD simulation. So for that, what we have to do is first you take an statement from an industry. Okay, so this is my vehicle. This my say XYZ is my load. This is how my drive profile shall be, and based on that, these shall be the your boundary conditions. So once you have all these sets of inputs, this shall be, you have to tune your boundary conditions, and then you have to monitor all of this. So actually ANSYS, Star CCM, GT Suite are the three softwares that we are actively involved in pursuing this development process.
Thank you, sir. Actually, it was a very great informative session. You have started with the battery thermal management, cell life cycles, and then battery power versus temperature, the factor impacting thermal system design, the types of cells and battery pack assembly process, especially the factors on heat generation inside the battery pack,
Yeah.
thermal load design calculations process, the heat generation formula and measurement of thermal resistance, and important case studies. We thank you for this very great session, sir. And on behalf of RMK College of Engineering and Technology and the coordinator of this faculty development program, Dr. Bibin, sir. So we thank you for giving this great session, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very